I am in Berlin at my home, where I have a home studio. And right now I am working on the pilot episode of a new Netflix series that I just got invited to score together with my wife, Mary. As you can see behind me, there is a second keyboard, and that's Mary's place, and I'm here in the front. On a very basic level, there is not a huge change in my style of working, because most of the work that I do is done in this very room. So I'm very used to living and working by myself or together with Mary. So it was not a very dramatic change. Actually, I had the feeling that in last year, the world has adjusted to our lifestyle to some extent. But of course, there have been obstacles and there have been challenges. And these challenges, I found some of them quite inspiring. There is a problem right now in organizing studio recording sessions. And we had to become creative, and we built a little recording booth at our home, and we equipped it and we started recording. And this actually allowed us to experiment much more than we would be able to on a limited time schedule in a recording studio. It's opened up a lot of room for experiment, for sonoristic experiment, for using very unusual materials to create musical sounds. And just the time to do this is actually, I'm finding it very inspiring. Quite recently, I worked on a film called Quo Vadis Aida by the Bosnian director Jasmila Zbanic. And it's a film about the atrocity of Srebrenica in 1995, about the massacre, the genocide of Srebrenica. It's a very powerful film, very raw. Actually, it's a film that could very well work without any score at all. And if you start from this point, from the zero, and you know that you don't want to hurt the story with your music, you definitely don't want to make it sentimental or easily digestible for the viewer, because that's not the purpose of this kind of story. You're putting one foot before the other very, very carefully. And we made the decision, we started dialogue about this very quickly, about this issue with the director, and we agreed that we can only create a kind of a musical frame for the film in the very beginning of it and very end. At the very end, so it practically became reduced to two instances of music. I later found another bridge in the story where I felt that music could work, could support it. When you have a situation like this, every note you put on paper and you record has a meaning. Every modulation, every change of pace, every change of instrumentation, every accent, everything becomes very, very significant. And this is actually something that I find very challenging and exciting, because this film, and it's not the first one like this that I've worked on, has made me realize how powerful the tool is that I have at my disposal. The more carefully I use it, the more powerful it becomes. There are directors who like to speak, to discuss before we even start to work. And then they want to name things. They want to have things spoken through and have some kind of a grid line, some kind of a schedule, a plan. They have this intellectual approach to music. From my experience, usually once you get into the mess of film music, you abandon these concepts. And then there are those who are very intuitive from the onset, who prefer not to speak much at all and begin immediately by trying things out. And then in any instance, what I do, let's say that the film is already edited in some form. I have a film that's that resembles already more or less the final product, the final story. Then I watch it. I always try to watch it without any music, even if there was some music put in as temp tracks during the edit. The first viewing I do is without any music at all, because I really need to have this moment of a kind of an awakening of an urge, my own urge to supplement a scene or a character or a moment with a motif. If I feel that there is something missing that I can provide, this is where my imagination gets triggered. And usually when you locate such a spot, it can be sometimes it's the beginning of the film, sometimes it's just a random scene, not even necessarily the most important scene in the film. Then you start building from that very point. You start kind of extending the narrative in both directions, to the back and to the front, and waving a net. This is how I usually start working. Gareth Jones, who's a journalist, a Welsh journalist, a freelance journalist, he has embarked on a journey to Moscow. We are in the middle of the 30s. So Moscow is under the reign of Stalin, but there is a lot of misconceptions about Stalin and Stalinism and communism in Western Europe. Gareth Jones is a very curious character. He has found some discrepancies in Soviet propaganda, and he wants to confront those discrepancies with Stalin himself. His ambition is to actually go to Moscow and have an interview with Stalin. And he has a somewhat sentimental vision of Eastern Europe and Moscow. And as he travels by train from west to east, watching the landscape behind the windows of the train changing, he realizes that actually he's entering a very, very, very different world. And we lead him with music and with these very intense editing effects and elements, visual elements on his way. With this particular scene, it's a kind of a montage, a traveling montage. It's a bit of a pastiche of classical cinema. You can see clear inspiration by films by Sergei Eisenstein and those great masters of Soviet cinema. The machinery, the pace, the dynamic of it. It was clear that we want to find something that's going to be very intense all of a sudden, because before and actually afterwards, there is not much musical storytelling happening. At least I knew by then that whatever happens afterwards is actually subdued and silence and is very spread out, very discreet. So this is actually a moment to build something from which I can start deconstructing. And I created a motif for the scene, which was a very simple rhythmical motif. It's mostly rhythmical. It doesn't have any melody really. And the whole idea of it was to use a kind of a technical trick, which meant that we have the same motif on strings, on lower strings, recorded at two different tempi. Let's say 120 beats per minute and then 106 beats per minute or something. And so it slowly starts to kind of decompose, desynchronize, and you feel a kind of an awkwardness of it. You clearly feel that there is something moving forward, but it's not a pleasant movement. It's a movement that's broken inside, that is full of anxiety. And this kind of anxiety, which seeps into this kind of notion of totalitarianism, is something that this film is conceptually about. And I found this way or this technique to be quite well corresponding to the general narrative of the film. I love the orchestra. I love the possibilities it creates. I always try to use it in a way which is not very classical, and try to explore sounds within the orchestra that are not obvious. That's been my journey ever since I started composing. I remember last year when we went into lockdown, I was just about to record with the orchestra. We had to cancel the session. It got postponed and postponed. Once we gathered in the studio after half a year at least, with all the distancing, etc., we were all so emotional and moved about this that I realized how much I depend on these people, on their talent, on their creativity. It's actually probably the most important thing about working with an orchestra. It's actually a set of very talented individuals that you can have dialogue with. An orchestral session is very condensed. It's something that you prepare for many months, and you always have too little time in the studio because it's very costly, obviously. And everybody's very excited and very nervous, and there is a lot of technology involved in it, recording technique, etc. So sometimes there is little time to actually speak about what's really important. And I try to make this time as much as possible. I speak to the musicians. I try to introduce them to the film, to the mood of the film, and explain to them what role music will be playing in the film. And I've realized that speaking this emotional language to an orchestra is actually immensely helpful. It's something that many orchestral musicians have told me that they don't experience very often, that they're being treated as machines. And I really, really try to create a kind of an emotional and artistic and creative bond with them. They appreciate it, and the effect is much better. We've created a tandem, and we work together. We've worked together ever since we've known each other. First on her project, she's a recording artist. And then she also got more and more involved in my composing, and we reached a point at which at least some of the projects we do together. And she's always involved in some form, even in those projects which I take by myself. She's always the first person to listen to the music and to speak to me about it. And composing is, by definition, a very individualistic job. It's something that you cannot do in a tandem unless you give up a little bit of your ego. You have to enter a kind of a realm of artistic generosity with each other. And we've learned that over the years, and I think we actually achieved together a higher level than each one, a kind of a synthesis, a synergy. Mary's role in the beginning was, and to some extent it's still today, is a role of a translator. What she is very good at, and which I sometimes am maybe not as efficient at, is communicating with the director. And we've realized that it's very often I create one pole and the director is on the other pole, and she's in the middle. And she has this position of talking to the director and to me, or to the editor and to me. There are moments where I am more empathetic to the director's vision, and I will work as a translator. When I first scored a film for Agnieszka, I was very young. I was so young that I probably couldn't entirely understand the whole intellectual aspect of the story. But I think I was very good in my intuition, and I was fresh. I had lots of ideas. She needed this kind of music that would be about leaving a comfort zone, that would be about exploring the unknown. She was leading me in a very discreet way, but definitely shepherding me in a certain direction. I became more and more autonomous. She became more and more curious in what I had to say and what I had to show. That has been a steady evolution. You know, I've grown. That's obvious. You know, I'm more mature. I can formulate things more. I'm more self-aware.